The topic of this video will come as no surprise to either the community or Valve Software themselves. Anybody that's watched this channel for any length of time is used to the idea of leaks showcasing games that would have been amazing if Valve was capable of finishing them, and this is no different. The publication of this information is more done to make sure that anybody attempting to relay the information here doesn't do it with an over-exaggeration on what actually exists. This will come with all of the trappings of history and context that we now have with the gift of hindsight. The release of HalfLife Alex has allowed Valve to be candid about the production hell that they have gone through with relation to the Half-Life series, and because of that, we're able to connect dots that we previously didn't even see. Now, before we get to that, this video is sponsored by shirts. 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 Into the AM. They make cool clothing. I mean, like, look at this. It's like tree. It's like it's tree NA. This is an astronaut. It's a puddle. He's like he's got play Saturn. I think that's Neptune. It's a butthole. Like, it's a space tree. It's moon, space tree. There's us. What is that? Gumball. Using my custom link, which is on the screen and also down in the description below, you get 10% off any order on Into the AM, and they have bundle deals. You can get 3 graphic tees for $60 or 3 basic tees for $45, and while that link does get you a discount, I get a cut of that. It's a win-win. You get tree, you get space tree, moon, us, Gumball, and I make Into the AM. Thank you very much for sponsoring. A video game called Half-Life 3 has really only seen 3 major development cycles in any meaningful capacity over the last 15 years, taking place in 2012, 2014, and 2016. To give a quick history rundown, Half-Life 3 was originally just going to be episode 3, stretched out over the course of an entire game. The development team of Portal 2 jumped right over to this project, trying to maintain the momentum they had following the release of that game. It quickly fell apart as the game did nothing new. That team started again in the latest version of Source 2, then being the counter-chuggable offensive engine that was in production, and we saw some early iterations of RPG mechanics, open world mechanics, and a basic crafting system that later evolved into its own prototype, Dog Resource Gathering, that eventually became a Fallout 4 style game starring Alex Vance, itself then evolving into the resin weapon upgrade system seen in Half-Life Alex. What we have as Half-Life Alex is an amalgam of 2 decades of canceled projects that the community had previously not seen. The most important and longest lasting started sometime between 2013 and 2014, headed by David Spayer, himself discussing the specifics of this project in the final hours of Half-Life Alex. The game was to have a focus on procedural generation, making each playthrough a bit different. Quests would be given to the player through citizens of City 17, and those quests could be dynamically changing in terms of both what the player is meant to do and what the world space is to look like. All of this fell through, and almost none of it found its way to Half-Life Alex, the Alex team instead taking huge inspiration to the then canceled Left 4 Dead VR title, the Resource Gathering title, and the Dota RPG, as well as an earlier version of Half-Life Alex that we discussed at length in the past. So what we're dealing with is that version of the game, the procedural generation quest-giving Half-Life 3. As it turns out, we have actually been staring at this version of the game for nearly 6 years. In preparation for the release of the HTC Vive, Valve's first consumer-grade VR headset, Valve shipped the Steam VR Performance Test Bench, itself a piece of software that tested a user's computer to see if it was powerful enough to handle the then-in-development VR software. It came with a basic version of the robot repair demo that would run automatically, testing different high-intensity situations and giving the user a readout based on the computer specification. This demo actually existed publicly on the back end of Steam
for months before it shipped, dating back as early as June of 2015. If users were capable of finding the manifest ID, they would have been able to download an early version of this program without Valve even knowing it was public in the first place. And this early version of the program was chock full of development assets that were not meant to be seen by the public. Some of these assets are highly publicized and have to do with basic VR tests in the Left 4 Dead and Half-Life universes. However, upon closer inspection, and a closer inspection that has not taken place until many years later, many of the procedural generation functions that were originally intended for Half-Life 3 have been sitting in this program's code the entire time. And now that we have the release of Half-Life Alex, and Valve did accidentally ship a slightly earlier version of that game, the version that was supposed to be given out to press only, those same entities were there, as well as many more and more up-to-date versions. In the right hands, it would be possible to spruce them all up and build a map, a vertical slice if you will, that truly shows off what Valve was intending out of Half-Life 3. Fortunately, and completely by coincidence, I had nothing to do with this, a team that remains anonymous is currently working on it, and they are making some huge progress.
We're trying to look at all of this stuff that's made for Half-Life 3. There's not much like story out there about what Half-Life 3 was going to start with or end with, you know, map-wise. It's just taking this and then trying to turn this into some sort of experience that people could just play around with some Half-Life 3 stuff in some coherent, you know, gameplay way.
They're definitely Half-Life quests because they're really weird. It's how it works is basically he beckons you and he's like, oh, I got a problem. And then entities get toggled for the quest stuff, and then the quest is marked. It's kind of like you're conscripted to a quest. You don't really have a choice if you interact with the citizen.
Half-Life 3 is being reverse engineered by a group of data miners using only what Valve has accidentally put out into the public over the last 6 years. The goal of the team is to release a vertical slice that takes place in City 17, playing Gordon Freeman, with different NPCs giving Gordon a series of quests, all taking place in a very small section of the city. These quests would be procedurally generated, and the user could solve these problems using a multitude of tools at the player's disposal. New tools, such as the spy grenade, the crowbar zipline, and a few others. The weaponry that at first glance appeared to be ported wholesale from Half-Life 2 has actually been written almost from scratch. Now, without boring everyone here with specifics on the mechanical side of this data mine production, I instead would implore you to pause the screen right now as you read the current in-development vertical slice planning document. All of this is currently being developed by this data mining team using all Valve-created functions and mechanics to be able to demonstrate what Valve originally intended Half-Life 3 to be back in 2015. This, again, was the version of Half-Life 3 that David Spare was leading back in 2015. More information on the Half-Life 3 reverse engineer project will be provided as soon as I have more to give. This is an ongoing project, and a project that does not require any more help than they are currently getting. However, it is a project that needs to be discussed publicly as to not be hidden by the passage of time. This is a hugely important case of game preservation, and there is not a video game that is more important to the general psyche of gaming public than Half-Life 3. I have an ongoing document with more information down in the description below if you'd like to read up on some more specifics as to what is exactly going on here, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Tyler McVicker. This is not Valve News Network anymore. Thank you very much to our patrons. Please get vaccinated. Have a good day. Adios.